Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Money with Dan Arfin. I am Dan Arfin. And I got to tell you, I am getting just. The whole point of this podcast was for me to therapeutically spew out my aggravations of the day-to-day senselessness poker players have to deal with. And I know that I'm speaking not just my inner monologue, but yours too. But it's getting to a point now where, and I don't mean I'm going to stop the show, no way, but at this point, I almost don't even want to think about this shit anymore because I can't do it without getting really angry about it. But I still have to talk about it because if I don't, I'm going to feel even worse. But anyway, this week's episode is brought to you by Please Shut the Fuck Up. And one other thing before I continue. People, you may have noticed that on no occasions have I ever said to like or subscribe to the channel because I trusted by now, when I started this show, that everyone had long known to do that if they like the show and want more. Because I can't fucking stand it, and I know that no one else can either. When they're watching a channel and the host says, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I know to hit the subscribe button, okay? I've only been told to do that about 2,000 times. It's gotten to a point where I refuse to subscribe strictly because I was told to do it. If I was told nothing about it, I might have done it. So I tried to be different. By not pestering my listeners to tell them something they already fucking know because I've heard it 55,000 times. Why the fuck does everyone have to be such a sheep? Why the fuck do we all need this constant reminder to do something, otherwise we'll never do it? What are we, fucking children here? Because someone told me the other day, you should make the announcement because people tend to like it more and subscribe more if you tell them. And then I just thought, you know what, fine. I'll bend over and break. But I'm not doing it perkily. I'm doing it mockingly. So like and subscribe to the channel, okay? You got it? Good. Now, for today's show, there's not going to be any in-depth hand analysis because I have just been having such a hard time lately with keeping my mouth shut from responding to the utterly baffling, boneheaded things people say and do. I said it in episode 1 that it all goes hand in hand with why there's money in poker at all, so you just have to put up with it. But you know something? I don't care because right now I don't even I don't even know if I can take it. I mean, it's gone too far. And I'm about to have a fucking breakdown. Another one. So today is going to be nothing but the things I heard recently at the table. Some of which I responded to and some of which I didn't. Some of them occurred within hands, but like I said, there's not going to be any really deep analysis here. So, alright. Number 1 example. Here we go. Under the gun limps, everyone folds, and the big blind checks. And I don't know what the exact runout was. I think it was 9, 4, 7, 10, ace. No suits. Flop, turn, and river were all checked. The under the gun turned his hand over first at showdown, even though the big blind's action to do so first. And we see this happen a lot, even in sizable pots. The under the gun limper shows 10-7, so he had 2 pair. Okay. And then the big blind exclaims, this young Asian player, he's like, why didn't you bet? As he turns over ace-4, he rivered a higher 2 pair and was likely going for a river check raise. So we have a heads-up limped pot. Under the gun versus big blind, 2 pair versus 2 pair, and the pot totaled 0 bets post-flop for $11 total after the $1 rake was taken. Now, the guy who limped in is this elder white guy. Not old enough to be an old man coffee, but he's well on his way. You can certainly put him in the AP classes for it, because he's just a bad nit and someone you never, ever want to have in the game, even if he isn't any good. But you know what this fucking guy says when asked, why didn't you bet your 2 pair against the big blind on the turn or river after he checked to you both times? He said, there was no money in the pot. Okay, first of all, that's not actually the truth. There wasn't no money in the pot. There was $11 in the pot. Yes, we all know what he meant. There was nothing significant in the pot. But the reason I'm taking him literally is because if there literally was $0 in the pot, then he would have a good reason for saying that. That is the only reason for him to have not bet the hand he just limped in under the gun with. Otherwise, there is $11 in the pot to play for, which is significantly more than zero. And if you've got both the balls and the nerves of steel to fire a wager when you've turned 2 pair against the big blind in a limped pot that went check, check on the flop, then trying to make the pot bigger is probably a good idea. What do you mean there was no money in the pot? How do you expect the money to get into the pot if you don't bet? If you want money to be in the pot, then why don't you try betting? And I said that to him. I said, in a relatively calm voice, but, trying to make it clear that I also want to be demeaning. I said the way the pot gets money in it is by betting into it. What did you think was going to happen? That chips were just going to magically bubble up from below the felt and find their way into the middle so that you have something extra to play for without even having to take the slightest of risks yourself? The dealer was laughing, but, holy shit. This man justified checking down this huge hand on the final 2 streets and just so happened to save himself money because the big blinds, in a rare case, wound up with a better hand. By using the logic that because the pot wasn't that big at the time, his hand materialized, then therefore it doesn't make sense for him to be betting into it to, try and make it bigger? Wow. Just plain wow. And you know what the funniest thing is? Before this even happened, I got into a spot with this guy where I had pocket 9s and had made 9s full. I was a small blind and he had limp called a big raise. Now the board went running clubs, on the turn and river, so he could have had a flush. I think the flop went check, check, and I bet turn. And the hand played out as such where I figured he's either going to fold a marginal hand to a river bet or he's going to have a flush and then I can check raise him. So it seemed like it made more sense for me to check than bet, but I was still so scared to do it because I had this sneaking suspicion that this guy, even if he had a flush, might just check back on the river anyway, simply because the board had already paired and maybe he also would have thought that the pot wasn't big enough to justify him betting into it. Well, he didn't have a flush. He checked down ace-queen high in position, didn't have any clubs. He showed his hand first, of course. And remember, this happened before the 2 pair hands. So I felt smart. I thought, okay, I gave him his 1 in a trillion chance to bluff, which is better for me since there was 0 chance he'd call a bet. But you know something? Who knows? After hearing what he said later and the little sneaking fear I had before, I would not put it past this guy to have checked down a flush just because. Just because. Because of everything that occurred later. He'll come up with some reason. I made my flush. It's all right. Let me I'll just take it here. I'm not going to try and win some extra money with it. And then a couple orbits later, he pulls this other nonsense with 2 pair because the pot that he refused to bet into didn't have enough money in it to warrant him betting. I know we need fish thinking to have a game, but at the same time, I really wish sometimes that they would just go away. Anyway, so I said there wouldn't be any, nerdy hand history analysis this week, and there's not going to be, but I have to go through this hand quickly. So this new-faced reg I've seen for just a couple times recently, he opens from the low jack to 20, and he's just a white guy. He looks like he's in his early 30s, and he just seems like he's just going to be another ABC run-of-the-mill nit. This is the second game I sat with him. The first day he bought in with $700. Today when I sat down, he had a bunch, probably over 2,000. So I don't know if he bought in more or if he was just having a big day, probably the latter. But the hijack called, and I called the cutoff with pocket 3s, so we go 3 ways. And the flop comes Jack 7-3, rainbow. They check to me, I bet 35, and the razor calls. We go heads up, turn is a 5 of clubs. 2 clubs now. He checks. I bet 140, which is, I think, a tiny bit over the pot size, and he calls. And the river comes another 5, so I got the low boat. And now suddenly he leads into me for 400, and behind it I've got about 8 or 900 left. Now, just very quickly, his river bet is beyond moronic, because if I have a big hand I'm betting, and if I have a bluff, now you've taken away my chance to do it. Because we know he's not bluffing here. I don't know precisely what kind of range I'm expecting him to have, but it's not going to be a bluff, so I didn't really think about anything else. I waited 15 or 20 seconds, and I went all in. I faded the ever-terrorizing snap call, and then about 10 seconds later, he sighs, like legitimately sighs. Okay? He sighed. I heard him sigh. Then he rolls his eyes. He drops in the chips, calling like, okay. And after I show the pocket threes, he shows me pocket sevens. Full house. So the only hands he loses to are pocket fives for running quads or pocket jacks for top full house, which means I would have not 3-bet that hand pre-flop. Now, if you heard me in episode 32, I screamed my head off during the World Series of Poker about 2 of the most epic, unthinkable nit rolls I'd ever taken, both at the hands of European players. In one hand, I was bluffing into a double-paired board, kings and queens, and it took him almost 5 minutes and ran the clock down to 0 to call with a king. And in the other hand, I had an overpair with pocket kings and was trying to rep a combo by overstuffing the shit out of the turn in a 3-bet pot on an extremely combo-heavy 2-tone board. And it took this guy almost a minute to call with second set. He had a set of 9s. 9-7-4 jack, 2-tone. And I thought those 2 nit rolls would be next to impossible to top. Well, not only was I wrong, it was swiftly surpassed 2 months later. This guy has pocket sevens on Jack 7-3-5-5 in a single raised pot, and he bets the river, and he doesn't want to call instantly when he gets jammed on? After taking this check called trap line on the flop and turn? I mean, that's what I said to him. I said, you didn't want to call with that hand? Then he just says, I mean, like he's about to start to explain himself. I just cut him right off. I said, okay, nice hand. And I just pushed all the chips over to him. This is the kind of shit that drives everybody nuts. It's because everybody perceives themselves to be such a knowledgeable player now that they will actually sit there and sigh whenever they have to call the river without the stone by the book totem pole nuts. That he's going to go like deep into his analysis because he knows so much about poker that he's going to really think about this like, does he have the 5s? Does he have the jacks? I mean, come on. What does he think, that pocket 3s would never jam there? Or that no one could ever show up with either 5-3 suited, or maybe the one combo left of 7-5 suited, or maybe they're just going out of their mind with either 6-5 for trips or 5-4 for the straight? I mean, it's just so unfucking believable what these people think of themselves. That he takes his time, rolls his eyes, sighs and calls, and then says, I mean, with a straight face, as if he had actually something to think about. I don't care if he got shown quads in that situation 15 times in a row. It doesn't fucking matter. Per the situation, you have the virtual nuts, you idiot. How much easier does this need to be for you? I mean, this was like some special ed shit. And I don't mean to be making fun of special ed kids because I have no idea how I wasn't one. But this is like doing 1 + 1 and triple checking your work on a scientific calculator and then being extremely reluctant when you write down that the answer is 2. I mean, I don't know what was dumber about all this. His decision to lead the river or his hesitancy to call. So after that, I table changed because the blue whale was back in action. Now, the blue whale is at least 90 years old, even though he said 4 years ago he was 97. He's often very belligerent and seems entitled to say whatever he wants because he's so old. He's some type of Middle Eastern, and I don't think he likes me. I thought I heard him say a few weeks ago some type of threatening comment in passing that had something to do with killing me. I wasn't really sure. I didn't quite get it all, but it didn't sound like something that had to do with him wanting me to stay alive. But when I joined the game, he said hi to me, and then he pointed to me in this very greeting manner, and then he winked at me, and then he asked, how are you? So look at this. This was quite the pleasant surprise. I said hello and hi back, of course, like we'd done it 100 times. Then he made some joke I never quite got. I think he said something like, you have my ex's money. Or, I mean, I don't know. I think it was some type of joke about an ex-wife of his, because he's made those many times before. Didn't really persist to understand it, though. I just went along with it like I already knew exactly what he meant. I was mainly just thrilled that the blue whale was suddenly friendly to me. I guess the next time I see him, I'll say hi to him too and see if he reciprocates it or if he looks at me like I'm a fucking asshole. So anyway, then comes a hand where not one, but two of the tens were exposed during a hand. And then a player says, "It's not coming." So I said, "Yeah, there's only two tens in the deck. We're playing a partial version of short deck. There's only 50 cards in the deck." Now look, I know people are just kidding, and I shouldn't take any of these kinds of comments too seriously because they're just having a good time and relaxing, so they crack jokes. But you know something? If you're going to crack jokes, it needs to at least be somewhat funny. And that was not somewhat funny. And this is a big deal to me because unlike many others, I do not show up to the casino to have a good time. I try to, but that's not why I'm there. I'm there to make money. And when there's two tens exposed, yes, the likelihood of one running out on the flop turn or river is drastically less likely. But why would you say it's not coming? Like, why? Why? Fuck me, I am cracking up. Whatever. So then comes a hand where, I must say, I don't really remember anything other than that someone had ace-king and didn't get aggressive with it. And then he said, confidently, like he really knows what he's talking about, he said, "Ace-king in a cash game, no good." What? Why is ace-king no good in a cash game specifically? I mean, we gotta fucking listen to this shit all day. I know that in tournaments, most of the time, you're going to be managing a stack that's relatively low, 20 or 40 big blinds at the most, so that you're going to be looking to get your stack in with ace-king pretty often because it's something you simply have to do. That said, explain to me how, like, the intrinsic value of this hand suddenly changes just because it's no longer a tournament. You know, every time a player says, "Oh, I hate ace-king," or "I hate aces," well, it's obviously because they've lost one too many big pots with both hands, and they just feel it causes them more problems than it solves, and okay, fine. It's a frustrating outcome. I mean, whenever we get aces, we all get very, very excited, because we all think if we can just get all the money in now, while we got the nuts, we got a great shot at doubling up. But you know something? That doesn't get to happen that often. How often do you get dealt aces and get it in preflop? What percentage of that happens? I don't know what it is. It's damn low, though. So instead of hating on the hand themselves, people, maybe you should think about two things. One, why don't you try lowering your expectation of the hand and stop acting like it's supposed to be inherently invincible? Yes, aces is the nuts pre-flop, but it's two cards and it's got a long way to go. But it does have the best shot out of all the hands. And number two, instead of blaming the hand, why don't you try getting a little better at playing the hand? You know, I used to always say crappy players play crappy hands crappily. Well, they play the good hands too, but that doesn't mean they play them any better than they play the bad hands. And I guess what happens is when people have aces and it's the best hand, they bet way too big, so they win nothing with it. Or when it's cracked, they hold on to it for way too long, so they lose their ass. So they get killed with the hand, so they hate the hand. Well, look, it's not the hand's fault. You don't know what you're doing. I've seen people raise and have the flop go 5 ways. The flop comes 9, 7, 6, and then they c-bet into 4 players. And then they get to showdown. They turn ace-king over. Everyone sees what they did. And then they look surprised that someone beat them. So I'll ask again, why is it ace-king's fault that you decided to bet a horrific, absolutely horrific flop into 4 other players? This would be bad if it was into 1 player. Ace-king and cash game, no good. Okay, spoken like a true fish. Then I get blind versus same Rhodes Scholar. And I had seen him just flat ace-king suited in the small blind earlier after a fish had opened, so he backs up his words. Anyway, I raise king 10 off from the small blind. He defends big blind. Flop is 7-5-5, 2 spades. I have air, but I bet since he had shown throughout the day that he's going to overfold post-flop. But then he raises. Okay, I fold, and then he shows me ace-8 of spades for the nut flush draw. Has me beat just with the ace. But then he adds, "I didn't want to take any more of your money." I said, "Thank you, that's nice of you." But once again, what am I even listening to here? You just said ace-king is no good in a cash game. But when you flop the nut flush draw with ace-8 on a board that's already paired, Now you're talking as though your hand is already a royal flush? I mean, what if I had ace 5 and then 3-bet the flop? What's he going to think about his hand then? What's he going to say then? I didn't want to take any more of your money. Then came a hand on another table I had just transferred to. There was a raise, one call. I 3-bet the big blind with king, queen off. They both called. The flop comes queen, 6-6, 2 diamonds. I bet. The open raiser folded. The other guy called. Turn was a brick. I think it was a 4. I bet again. He calls. The river is another brick. It's a 7. I jam. He tanks. He calls. I stack him. Yay. But after he leaves, then the guy sitting next to him asks me, he's like, did you want him to call you? Did I want him to call me? I just 3-bet and triple barreled and shoved king queen on queen 6-6-4-7. And you're trying to confirm if whether or not I was bluffing? This time I wasn't as irritated since I just stacked a guy, but holy shit, I still answered him a bit humorously. He asked, did you want him to call? I said, well, it depends on what his hand is. And so some people laughed. But you know what? I should have just trolled the fuck out of him, so I regret it. I should have said no. I was 100% trying to bluff him off of a 6 or ace queen. No, I did not want to call. Did I want him to call me? What the fuck do you think? I mean, he was a nice guy, so I feel a little bad saying all this, but not bad enough to not say it, because just how the fuck do you ever ask a question like that? These are the people who show up to games recreationally, and they really think they have a solid idea as to what they're doing. A couple days later, it's my first orbit. I raise with ace-9 suited. The big blind calls. Flop comes ace-queen 3. He check calls 15. Turn is a queen. Goes check, check. The river is a brick. He checks. I bet $5. He thinks for a moment and folds, and then says to me, you look too strong. I was going to raise. So then he was patting himself on the back for folding to my $5 bet because I looked too strong. And then, of course, about an hour later, he stacked off 400 big blinds with a 10-high flush, calling a raise with 10-3 suited. There was an under-the-gun raise, and he called on the button. They went 5 ways. The flop was 4-5-8, all diamonds. It checked to him. He bet. He got check raised. He 3-bet to 600. And then he called off the 4-bet all-in, drawing dead to the ace-high flush for about $2,000 total. So I guess the 4-bet all-in from the under-the-gun raiser to $2,000 didn't look strong, or at the very least not as strong as my river $5 min bet did into a $70 pot. Later that day, I ended up at the Venetian. I hadn't been there for a while. The Venetian is kind of a tilting room to play in for me because they do a double board PLO bomb pot every half hour, and on average these hands probably occupy a good 10 to 15% of the time you spend there. But anyway, we get to our first bomb pot, and I always sit these out, but then the guy next to me says, totally friendly, he's like, you don't want to play? He's like, the ante's only $15. If you lose, you only lose $15. Oh, really? That's interesting. So even though the whole purpose of playing the bomb pots is because it gets people to put their stack in way more often, his selling point was that if you lose the bomb pot, the most it'll cost you is the ante. Gee, how did I not think of that? All this money I've been missing out on bomb pots where I could stack somebody or lose $15 worst case. Needless to say, about an hour later, this person got stacked in one of the bomb pots, and that proved to be his final hand of the evening. I guess they must have anteed more than $15 that time, and I just wasn't paying attention. But before he got stacked, there would be some other moments from him that were worthy of winning a Nobel Prize. In one of the Hold'em hands, there was a multi-way pot where someone bet $50, and he not only called out of turn, he called out of turn with not 1, not 2, but 3 players left still to act in front of him. Do you ever get the feeling sometimes people just aren't paying attention? Then later on, in a 3-way pot where he was last to act, he bet out of turn before both players did. Once this was realized, the player that was supposed to act first said to him, you just lost your opportunity to make any money, buddy. So both of them checked, so that the guy who acted out of turn, Winston Churchill, let's call him, so Churchill acted out of turn, and now he'll be held to the bet he had made, which was $75. And then the guy who just told him he'd cost himself his chance to make any money now calls the $75 bet. Okay. And last but not least, after all this out of turn betting and calling Churchill did, there came a point when it was his turn to bet, but he had to be prompted to do so because he didn't know. So he always bets when it's not his turn, and he doesn't bet when he does. All right. Meanwhile, I couldn't win a hand. The one time I 3-bet, of course I didn't have it, and of course I got 4 bets. And then Cotton Eye Joe started playing in the casino. Cotton Eye Joe. I think the last time I heard that song was at somebody's bar mitzvah when I was 13 in 1998. Now, Cotton Eye Joe, I mean, sure, that's a hell of a fun song to party to when you're 13, and the most fun you get to have is watching scrambled porno on Spice and looking cool from holding an empty beer can. But other than that, imagine hearing Cotton Eye Joe in the casino at 3 a.m. when you're stuck and can't win a hand. It's not that it upset me, I just didn't see that coming. Cotton Eye Joe. Then something happened that I was glad because it gives me a chance to fuck with people. You know how sometimes there's a runaway chip? Like if someone drops in, say, $85 worth of red chips to call a bet, so that's 17 physical chips, but one of them rolls away out of the pot and into someone else's stack. Well, it's just funny how whenever that happens, the chip that rolled away is the literal chip that every person near it chases after like a smart bomb to retrieve it and put it back in the pot. No one ever seems to realize that there are hundreds of other red chips on the table of the exact same value, and that it doesn't need to be that actual chip. So this happens, and this runaway chip ends up in front of me, and I threw the guy a different red chip to rectify the situation. That's my default. This is not the first time I've done this. Churchill saw me do this, and I told him that chip is less valuable. And then Churchill says, "Those are the first words I've heard you speak." And that was far from the case, too. So he's not paying attention to anything the table's saying either. I said to him, "I've cracked about 4 other jokes already, so you're 1 for 5. Now look, maybe it wasn't 5 total jokes. Maybe it was only 3 or 4. I don't know. I wasn't fucking counting. The point is, you can just add this to the now extensive list of things this person had absolutely no comprehension or clue of what was going on whatsoever. Then I got dealt a deuce like 8 hands in a row. Sometimes I've asked the dealer, like, how many deuces are in this deck? I didn't ask him that time, but Jesus. Then the guy next to me, he was in a pot, and I'm not kidding, he rechecked his cards like 7 times before folding to a bet post-flop. And he was doing it quickly where you can hear the cards peeling and hitting the felt. It sounded like this. You know the sound. What is the deal with it when people do that? Is it like a nervous habit? Looking at your cards doesn't change them, people. I don't understand why people do that. Then something interesting happened. This Israeli guy bet the river, and the same guy who I just mentioned about rechecking his cards, he was going to call the guy. He did a forward motion with his chips, and the Israeli was about to turn his cards over, but then the guy took his money back and continued to deliberate his decision. Now, he ended up calling anyway, and when he did, the Israeli showed 6 high, so he lost. But then he told the dealer that the forward motion needs to be held to a call so that he can't get angled. Now, it didn't seem like the Venetian enforced that particular rule, or maybe it was ambiguous, I don't know. But I just thought that was funny that he was bluffing, but then was talking about how he wanted that forward motion to be ruled a call. I said to him, you wanted him to be held to a call? Now, I was joking, of course. I totally understood he meant this strictly on principle for the future. But he took me seriously. He's like, come on. He's like, I had 6 high. I was like, I know. I was kidding. God, am I that much of a fucking prick that no one can tell when I'm joking anymore? God, maybe I am. Then we had another hand that had a huge delay in it because the dealer was talking to a cocktail waitress about something, and the player whose turn to act, he could not release himself from the captivation of watching this. And I'm just sitting there with my mouth shut, watching this player watch a conversation and make no effort to realize whose turn it is and realize that he's delaying the game until long after the conversation between the dealer and cocktailer had ceased. Then there was a showdown of Jack, Jack, Queen, 4, 6, 3 spades. One guy had a flush and the other had Queen, Jack for a full house. And there was quite the debate between the dealer and the players as to who won this pot. The dealer, for quite some time, was convinced that the flush had won. She started pushing the pot that way. But eventually she figured it out. Then lastly, we're back at the win. A guy played a pot which he lost, But in that hand, 3 sevens had ran out. And then the next hand, that same guy limps in. A couple others limp. The big blind raises to 20, just 20, with $500 in front of him. And the first limper under the gun shows me his hand and folds, and he showed me pocket sevens. Okay. Then he says to me, he's like, why couldn't I have had that the last hand? So I empathized with him and told him, yeah. I said, then you would have had 5 sevens. You would have had 5 of a kind. I haven't seen that in a while. And then he told the rest of the table after this hand was over, and 3 other people told him the same thing. But that was just the beginning, because this guy would not shut the fuck up, hounding the floor staff constantly about our game being too short. Now, in his defense, he wasn't wrong. We were the 4th game to open, and we weren't even full when we started, and then they started a 5th game, and that wasn't full either, so that really didn't make much sense. But he was going on and on and on and on and on about it. And he wouldn't do it away from the table. He was complaining to other players. He was complaining to the floor at the table. He would not fucking stop. And he refused to play until the table was completely full. And don't ask me how I bit my tongue during most of this, but holy shit, I should have called the clock on this guy. I should have asked the floor, can we get time on this fucking complaint? It's enough already. Nobody wants to hear any more of this. Finally, someone who was new to the game had joined in the middle of this, didn't even hear all of it. Finally, he starts to gently hint at him, all right, can we just play? And these 2 guys looked about the same age. And then the complainer, he's like, I'm doing this for you guys. Okay, sure. This is all on our behalf, he's speaking. It's got nothing to do with exactly what he wants. So finally, when the game starts to fill back up, I tell the guy in the big blind who was suggesting he stop moaning about this, I said, you should sit out this hand. And then Mr. Complainer says, hey, I don't like playing shorthanded. Maybe you do, but I don't. I said, it's not about what I want. Just stop saying you're arguing about all this for us. Please. Eventually, he table changed, and I don't think I've ever been happier to see a player do that than when this guy did it. And that is saying a lot, because all the games sucked on Friday. I table changed once as well, and then he ended up back in my table. And of course, like before, I didn't mention this, but of course, like before, he was directly on my left again. God! And then he was telling me about a hand I had just missed since I had walked away for an orbit. He said the flop was King, Jack, 10 or something, and that one guy had kings, one guy had jacks. He said they checked the flop, and that he knew they were slow playing a big hand. And a king came on the river, so, just your everyday boat to quads cooler. But then he also said that the guy who had the set of jacks had bet the turn into the 2 of them. And he said, that was glad. He's like, he saved me money. He's like, otherwise I was going to take a shot at it. So one breath before, he knew both guys were slow playing a big hand, yet he still was playing to bluff the turn and felt fortunate when the opportunity was taken away after being bet into. Now, this is the kind of analysis you hear even from winning players on a daily basis. Nothing they say makes even a remote amount of sense. It is just one continuous act of inept contradictions, and it is utterly insufferable to listen to. That's why I'm so fucking pissed off today. I mean, this is like a guy walking out into the middle of a snowstorm in flip-flops and a bathing suit and saying, I knew it was going to be a blizzard today. I mean, a statement like that, generally speaking, is comparably sensible to the lessons players give you at the table. But whatever. That'll do for this week. Got the weekend coming up. Can't wait to hear what other brilliant commentaries come out of these people's mouths this weekend. And their sports betting advice. You can't beat that either. But until then, till the next session, I guess I'll just go hit this one more time. We'll see you next time.